Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of From the Boardroom to the Locker Room. And as always, it's great to welcome on board Andy Capistanio. Andy, at last, and I don't mean this with no disrespect to any of the matches that the Springboks have played, but this is going to be real rugby coming up.
I'm glad you have more confidence in the Wallabies than I do. I think you might just find that the Springboks were tested a little bit more by Italy in those two Test matches than they will be by the Wallabies at Ellis Park, or the stadium formerly known as Ellis Park. Bearing in mind that in their long and storied history, the Wallabies have never won at Ellis Park. Did you know that, Louis?
I did indeed, and I know that Ellis Park is obviously a fortress similar to, New Zealand's fortress, of course, being so successful there over the years. And I guess I do have a little bit more confidence in Australia than I think you do, because I think the Lions series was pretty close. There were one or two contentious decisions that perhaps went against the Wallabies, but I never have a problem when the Wallabies get beaten. Let's be perfectly honest with that. But I just hope we are not undercooked going into the game with another 3 week break that we've had and so many changes that we've seen. I know it's great to have all these players available to you, but your thoughts?
I understand why anybody is a little bit reticent because of the fact that you can never write off a team like the Wallabies, who have still got lots of talent, despite the fact that Australian rugby is a low ebb at the moment. And I understand that you can look at this Springbok side and see the number of players in it who were not part of the successful World Cup campaigns. But this is, I think, a classic example of Rassie having used those three tests and the match against the Barbarians to come to this point where this is not the finished product, but this is a side that is horses for courses. What is fascinating to me, Louis, is that in the 23, there are 7 players who list Japan as their club, and nobody who plays there in Europe is part of this side. So what we're talking about is South African-based players mixed in with Japanese-based players. And that's a fascinating contrast to what we would have seen a decade ago, when people would have automatically said, you can't pick a guy who plays in Japan because it's not proper rugby. And here we are. This is one of the many, many things that Rassie Erasmus has brought to the party. He understands the dynamic of all of his players, and he's now got a squad as long as your arm and as long as my arm as well. And he is the man who eventually has to pull it all together. So yes, you could argue they've had 3 weeks off. They perhaps weren't tested as much as they ought to have been in those July test matches, but I haven't got a problem with this side at all. And as much as the Australians may have finished the series against the Lions better than they started it, I really can't see beyond a big win for South Africa.
Talking of that Japanese influence, if you like, on the Japanese clubs in South African rugby, that I think is the key, as you mentioned, to Rassie Rasmus' success, but perhaps the downfall to the likes of the New Zealanders, who I think are changing their thoughts on this going forward.
Well, Australia have already done it. So the Giteau law that was
Yes.
you could only play if you got 60 caps behind your name already and you were playing abroad, then they would pick you. They've got rid of that. And they understand that things have changed. And slowly but surely, the same thing is happening in New Zealand. And I think it's one of those things. We talked about leaving Super Rugby for so many years before it actually happened. Now that we've got 3 years of URC behind us, South African rugby is so strong because it's got players operating all around the world who are not just playing in South African conditions with South African coaching systems. So they bring amazing stuff to any squad that they're part of. And New Zealand not allowing players to just pick and choose where they want to play is going to be the end of them as a dominant force in world rugby. And it won't happen overnight. But it is already the case that already people are talking about the Springboks going to Eden Park and winning this year. And you've only got to go back before the URC to think to yourself, well, we can't win in Eden Park. Where else are we going to play them? We've got half a chance there. So New Zealand rugby and Australian rugby are at a crossroads, in my humble opinion. If we add in the R360 scenario of this sort of travelling circus that has been mooted to be getting underway in just over a year from now, the whole landscape of world rugby is about to change fundamentally. And I don't think that travelling circus is going to fly. Nobody's got that much money that they can afford to send a squad of 300 people around the world playing in different cities. It can't fly. But if it does one thing, which is to tell World Rugby that they need to get their ship in order, then it has been a positive improvement on the scenario. And the improvement that I'm talking about is you've got to find a way for the best provinces and club sides in the world to play in a competition that is part of a global season. Here we are, and I hate to digress, but here we are, we're in the middle of the URC off-season, and we're playing the Currie Cup, and we are seeing on a weekly basis under 21 sides representing their provinces in the Currie Cup. There's one reason alone for that, and that is that the global season hasn't happened properly, and the only time our players have a chance to rest is between URC seasons. So as much as we hate undervaluing and devaluing the Currie Cup, it is what it is, and it's part of the reason that I say World Rugby has got to look at this and come up with a competition that is inclusive. And very soon they're going to have a gun to their head, which will say the Wallabies and the All Blacks aren't going to be world stars if you allow this to just drift and kick the can down the road.
Yeah, because it was an interesting discussion that I had last week with Johan Ackermann, and he highlighted the fact that 11 Springboks will join him 1 week before the United Rugby Championship. That will be the first time he has them in a full training session ahead of the URC. So I guess in a way, we lose out in the URC in terms of the Bulls losing out in the final, and because our players are scattered all over the place. And Jake White last season said that he needed more money to be able to keep the players here. But it does benefit Springbok rugby in the long run. And I guess that's what the most important thing is, that Springbok rugby is strong and everything else will follow.
Yes and no. You can't have a strong Springbok side if you don't have structures. That's the thing you have to remember. And the same with so many sports, cricket being an obvious one. We're punching above our weight as a cricketing nation at the moment, despite the fact that our structures lower down don't work terribly well for many and various reasons. But we still churn out talent because our school systems and our university systems are so strong. So I'm all for, and it's something that used to inform everything that happened in New Zealand, was that the pyramid that peaks with the All Blacks, everything underneath the pyramid has to support the All Blacks. I haven't got a problem with that pyramid working for the Springboks, but you can't ignore what's going on underneath. And what's happening in the Currie Cup at the moment, you could argue, is the thin end of the wedge. If you allow the oldest provincial competition in the world to just be an under-21 competition, then you're saying to your sponsors, we don't value this, why should you? And we've spoken on this program before about how Springboks have got sponsors coming out their ears now because they're winning. And fine, you capitalize on the fact that you're strong and people want to put behind you, but lose a few games and see what happens there. And then you have to fall back on your structures. You've got to keep your structures strong. I don't know what the answer is for the Currie Cup, but I know what it isn't, and that's what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, as we transgress slightly to the Currie Cup, I mean, who would have dreamed that you'd be seeing Western Province and the Sharks sitting with a 0 and a 1 point, after the first series of matches, and not looking like they're even going to win a game in the next couple of matches either. I mean, that is really, really poor for the competition.
Well, I'm obviously closer to the Shark side than I am to the others. And when the first team of the season dropped in my inbox from the Sharks, I went down and I saw 23 names, and I think I knew three. I'm relatively close to the structures, and I knew three players. So that's the reason that they're not winning at the moment. And obviously, there's lots of talent in there. What concerns me, not just for the Sharks, but for all the teams, is that you kind of throwing people to the lions. So it's not the case that teams like Griquas and Pumas are sending out their under 21 sides, or the Cheetahs come to that, because it matters to them. This is a competition that they can now compete in, and they're up against a bunch of kids, not to put too fine a point upon it. And amongst those kids, there are going to be players who you hoped when you saw them come out of school were going to be stars, who may never reach that peak because of the fact that they've been thrown to the lions in this. I'm not party to what's been going on behind the scenes, but something has to change quickly, or this might be the last season that we play Currie Cup.
Yeah, and what also struck me, and I did it in a couple of weeks ago preview, and I made the comments on the Friday before the weekend, and I said that the Paul Jim Paul Boys High rugby game would have more people than the entire Currie Cup competition watching it live in venues, and how right I was.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, but to be fair, I mean, you're not comparing apples with apples there, because the Pyle Derby has attracted ridiculous crowds for years and years. I can remember in the 90s, Louis, going down to commentate on a game at Newlands, and it was Western Province against Northern Transvaal, as they were then.
Yeah.
And my co-commentator, Paddy Patterson, I asked him the question on air. I said, "Where is everybody?" Because Newlands was half empty, and he said, "Well, they made the tactical error of putting this game up against the Pyle Derby." He said, "You can't get into Pyle at the moment, but you can get into Newlands." So yeah, the Pyle Derby is different gravy. But the point you're making is that you can't attract crowds to the Currie Cup in these circumstances. Now, the Sharks are dealing with it in an interesting way, which I hope is going to be picked up around the country, and they're taking it out to the smaller venues. So last week they played at the Sugar Ray Kulu Stadium, which is near Pinetown, for those of you who know KwaZulu-Natal. And I think in 2 weeks' time they're playing in Pietermaritzburg at Woodburn Stadium, where the Sharks haven't played for decades. Well, fantastic. But if you're going to do that, you need your marketing department to tell people it's happening. I live in the Midlands. The only reason that I know that there's a game coming at Woodburn is because a former president of the Sharks Rugby Union, who is a friend who lives locally, told me. I've seen nothing in the media about it. And again, you know, you come back to money. At the end of the day, if you can't promote something, nobody's going to come. And then it becomes a vicious circle. There's nobody there. There's no atmosphere. Why should we do this? And so on and so on. But I think probably on the eve of the Rugby Championship starting, we're in danger, Louis, of just taking this down a little bit. We should be talking about what's going on at the top end.
Yeah, but you do give me some wonderful memories of that Woodburn Rugby Stadium. I did one of my first rugby commentaries ever there when it was still Natal. You're listening to the edition of From the Boardroom to the Locker Room. We'll have more for you after these. Hello, everybody. Join me on the next edition of From the Boardroom to the Locker Room as we look forward to a fantastic sporting weekend. The English Premier League gets underway. And, of course, the Springboks against the Australians while the All Blacks tackle Argentina. All that and more in the next edition From the Boardroom to the Locker Room. Anyway, let's go back to the big one. So Ellis Park, hopefully it'll be full, and the Springboks will definitely run out as favourites. Interesting selections, and I remember you and I chatting about this, about Sirkalisi at number 8, when the Sharks put him in that position once before, and I remember asking you, do you think that perhaps that is a precursor to what his position might be in the Springboks? And I guess, in a way, Russie's been forced into that position by suspension and red cards, or am I reading it wrong?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think the same is true of several of the other positions. I know that there's a whole bunch of people who think that Irfan Rus should be our starting number 8. Rassi, for whatever reason, doesn't particularly like him. The young man Cameron Hanekom from the Bulls is another man who people are saying to me is going to be the number 8 for the next 10 years. And there are a variety of other guys who could play that position. But here's the point, I think, Louis, that rugby union has developed and changed over the years to the extent that if you're running onto the field with a number 8 on your back, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be playing as a traditional number 8. And I think you'll find in several circumstances that Khaleesi will not pack down at 8. And his real role in the side is as a loose forward who gets quickly to the ball and makes it available for the backs. He's got also in the back row trio, Marco van Staden, who's an old-fashioned open side flanker. So I think what you're seeing here is that we're going with those two players plus Andre Esterhuizen at inside centre. Rassi is backing that trio to be first to the breakdown consistently. Australia does not have broken play ball to deal with.
Interesting, the selection at centre. I mean, years ago, and not that many years ago, we were all talking about Andre Esterhuizen and Jesse Kriel as being the long-term centre pairing for South Africa. Delende was slightly off form and whatever, and then obviously injury, and now Delende with a bit of a niggle. The two of them back together, an interesting selection at centre, and a very strong one at that, is attacking and defending rugby players.
Yeah, and you haven't even mentioned the name of Lukhanyo Am, who I think 3 years ago we were confidently saying that's the best rugby player in the world, and he picked up a couple of niggles, hasn't reached the same level that he did at the 2 World Cups, and now we're looking to the future. Now, having said that, you've got two 30-plus-year-olds in the centre, so it's not a long-term future, but part of what Rassi has brought to Springbok rugby over the last 8 years is the inability of critics to pick holes, because you cannot say that is an undercooked centre combination. Esterhuizen, we know, is a battering ram, but he's picked up a lot of skills after playing in Europe, in the English leagues in particular, where you've got to bring a little bit more to the party than the battering ram. And Jesse Kriel is, I'm happy to say, I know the family. I've watched him come through the ranks. I first saw him playing for Maritzburg College, I don't know, probably 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely delighted with the fact that he's now a first-choice player at outside centre. And remember, when he first came into the side, he looked like he was going to have that outside centre position nailed down. He scored an amazing try, almost on debut, I think, against the All Blacks. And things didn't go his way for a few years because there were players in his way. He's said to himself and to the rest of the rugby playing world, I'm not going away. So I'm here, pick me. And now I know he's got 80 caps, which is absolutely fantastic. And he may well be another one of the Centurions. And let's remember that this will be cap number 94 for Siya Kolisi. So those century of caps are coming up. And again, you look back a couple of generations of Springbok coaches where you never knew who was going to run out at centre from 1 week to the next. We just kept picking different people in those positions. And now Rassi has brought cohesion to the whole process.
Talking about pairings, for me, and it's my opinion, Etzebeth and De Jager at lock, the best that we could put out there. I mean, that's just for me. And Etzebeth continuing on with his record-breaking caps, equaling world records now, and what I think is 10th most capped international rugby player in the world.
Yeah, and I think that people who watch him playing for the Sharks would be perhaps questioning, is he as good as everybody says? Because he doesn't look like that when he plays provincial rugby. He has the odd good game. Don't get me wrong here. But he has the ability to step onto an international field and be the man mountain that we know he is. He's an extraordinary player. I'm not sure about Lud De Jager as the best number 5, but he's one of a group of 5. If it had been me, I think I would have looked at starting with Franco Mostert, but I understand why Rassi's done what he's done in putting Mostert on the bench, because he covers 7 and 5. and
Yeah.
4 if need be. And there's a guy that doesn't get enough credit, Franco Mostert, who now is one of those Japan-based players, plays for the Honda Heat. And he is a guy, if you look back at the Rassi Erasmus era, you try and find me a game where Franco Mostert isn't a superstar, and you'll struggle.
Yeah, and the other superstar, Peter Steph Toy, so glad to see him along with Marco van Staden and obviously Sia Khaleesi as your loose forwards. And then the interesting selection, and the old days of like, how many people disliked Graham Smith? I mean, the guy was brilliant, but people just for some reason or other disliked him and others loved him. Mani Libbok is the same example. I mean, this is a guy that plays outstanding rugby. He misses the odd kick here and there, and then people just go, whoa, what's he doing in the team? I mean, he's just a brilliant rugby player, isn't he?
I'm not a huge Mani Libbok fan, along with many South Africans, but I understand what he brings to the side. And it's interesting to see that on the bench, we've got a scrum half, a centre stroke wing, and a fullback stroke fly half in Damien Willemse. Again, as I've argued with Franco Mostert, if it was me making the selection, I would start with Willemse at fly half and have Libbok on the bench covering the other roles. But I understand why he's done what he's done. And here's the thing. I mean, you remember at the World Cup where Rassi backed Libbok, and in an important knockout game, he had a poor first 20 minutes. He hooked him off, and everything changed after that. So that's the bonus of where we are in a Springbok squad these days, that you can afford to start a game. Somebody is having a bad day. Oh, don't worry, bring him off. Let's change things around a little bit. Won't make a difference. So if it was me, Libbok would not be in the 23. I'd rather have Feinberg and Mngumezulu as our starting fly half, with Willemse covering fullback and fly half. But again, I go back to the fact that what Rassi has done in the last 8 years is silence people like me, because it's not my team, it's his team. And you have to just take your hat off to the guy and say, if that's what you think, I'll go with that, no problem.
Yeah, interesting the way Rassi thinks. Right, let's just move away quickly before we end tonight's podcast and look at the other two teams that are involved briefly. The All Blacks go to Argentina. They've never lost in Argentina, but they've lost in Australia to Argentina and in New Zealand to Argentina. The Argentinians are getting better and better, and they will be in front of a vociferous crowd. I know the All Blacks were at a football game earlier on in the week, and they were amazed at Boca Juniors at the Chocolate Box, how the Argentinian fans got behind the two soccer teams that were playing there. And I guess the crowds will get behind the Argentinian rugby team. Is that going to be a close encounter, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And if it's ever going to happen that Argentina beat the All Blacks in Argentina, it'll happen this week. I think that the All Blacks don't really know who their strongest side is at the moment. I don't think they've done anything extraordinary in that little series against France. They will not be traveling to Argentina feeling, well, we've just got to turn up to win. And I can remember back in the late 90s going to Argentina to commentate for an English TV channel. England were on tour there, and they gave us a spot to commentate from in one of the stands. And it wasn't the best built of stands. And when the game was close in the second half, the stand started to sway. And I've never felt more uncomfortable in a commentary position than I did on that day. And that feeling that you get when Argentina are on top at home is a very visceral feeling that things could go horribly wrong very quickly. And I take nothing away from the passion of the people there, but it is an intimidating experience. So if the All Blacks are going to win the game, they need to score early. They need to start like a freight train and try and just keep the crowd under wraps a little bit, because if Argentina get ahead, then it's going to be a very, very difficult mission for the All Blacks. And my record as a pundit is absolutely appalling and has been for 3 decades. But I fancy Argentina to win this one.
Yeah, I go with you on that one. You've actually given me a wonderful idea for a podcast. You and I should one day chat about commentary boxes we've been in around the world, because I'll tell
Yeah,
you what, we could have some wonderful stories, I bet.
I nearly got thrown out of a commentary box in for Nestle in
Yeah.
1994. Christie's team.
Uh-huh.
A guy, we were about to go live. This was on Radio 2000 on
Yeah.
SA Radio,
Yeah.
and 5 minutes before the teams ran out, this guy came up to me and said, "You're in my seat," and it was a member of the viewing public. And I said, no, there must be something wrong, sir. This is I'm with SA Radio. He says, no, I don't care. That's my seat. Get out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And amazingly, I was saved by the great Phil Bennett, who was a couple of seats down from me and knew this chap. And he saw that there was a problem, and Phil came up and had a word with the guy, and he went away. And as he went away, uttering oaths, we went live.
Amazing stuff. Lovely chatting to you as always, and we'll maybe do a podcast about commentary boxes and positions that we've been in and buses we've travelled into venues one day. Annie, I guess we all hope the Springboks are going to come out victorious. Perhaps the Argentinians can cause an upset here and there, but I guess at the end of the day, yes, winning the Rugby Championship is important, but it's all building up to the World Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, those signs that went up in the mid-90s when South Africa were going through a tough time before Nick Mallett took over, saying that they had a terrible team, but guess what? World champions until 1999. And the same story here, other than the fact that it's not a terrible team. It's a great side. If anybody beats the Springboks in the Rugby Championship this year, they deserve plaudits, because not just this side or this squad, but the extended squad is the best that this country has ever had. And I can really see them going through the tournament this year, cutting a swathe and showing the rest of the world that it is no coincidence that they've won 2 Rugby World Cups in a row.
Lovely stuff. Andy Capistanio, is always nice to chat to you. Don't forget Saturday's game at to Ellis Park, and then the following week at the Cape Town Stadium, the second test match against the Australians. That's tonight's edition of From the Boardroom to the Locker Room. As always, be nice to each other. Until next time, bye for now.